Hello and welcome to a new episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr, where we talk about the art and culture of running a record label. And we do so many different things, and there's so many resources we have available, and the different type of episodes that we've been doing throughout this past year and beyond, and all the great things that we have planned. But it is so nice to just talk to record labels. That was the genesis of this project, and it really is the core. It really is very exciting to just sit down and talk with a label owner who's been doing this for a year or for 10 years or for 25 years. Today's conversation, I'll be honest, is probably one of the most insightful and exciting record label interviews I've done in recent memory. I'm speaking with Trevor Peterson of Fire Talk Records. And there is just a wealth of wisdom here from Trevor. And so get out your notepads for this one, because there are some best practices and some free advice and some tips and all sorts of good things in this episode that you're going to want to steal, because I certainly have stolen it already from him. This is a really, really informative episode, and I hope that you find it really helpful. If you do, please let me know. Reach out. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me anytime at podcast@otherrecordlabels.com. And of course, if you're new to the show and you want to find out a little bit more about what Other Record Labels is, visit our website, otherrecordlabels.com, where we are a resource community for independent record labels of all stages and sizes. And we'd love to have you come by and visit and download some of our resources and check out previous episodes at otherrecordlabels.com. This is an exciting interview. I'm just go ahead, listen. I remember some labels telling me, especially labels that do their own mail order, that some labels telling me that physical sales were pretty good early in the pandemic. Like people were at home and needed stuff they wanted to shop basically, or they wanted music. Was that true?
Totally. Yeah. Totally true.
That's awesome.
We had there was I feel like all e-commerce in general,
true.
But it trickled down to music as well. And yeah, our physical sales were super strong for, a good amount of time there. They continue to stay strong for us. There's a little bit of a decline for sure in the past few months, but it's hard to run analytics on it and determine whether it's the fact that we had some pretty big releases last year and this year, due to the production, manufacturing delays, etc. Our release schedule is kind of like fanned out a little bit in unintended way.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of but I'd say in general things have been solid for.
Well, there's a lot of the things that people had to adopt because of the pandemic that is sticking around, and hopefully that kind of hesitation to buy a record online because maybe they wanted to save on shipping, or they kind of procrastinated and thinking, I'll pick this up next time I see the band, That obviously had to go away during the pandemic. So hopefully that's kind of here to stay, is that people are just a little bit more quick to buy online.
Yeah, totally. We do have a bunch of bands that have been back touring pretty heavily now, and certainly selling a lot more merch on the merch table than they ever have before. So
cool.
That's been, we've had to ship. Totally. We've had to ship, hundreds of records to random venues multiple times in the past couple of months now.
Is that nerve-wracking?
I mean, not yes and no. Logistics are always nerve-wracking, I feel like.
That's right, yeah.
In the States here, UPS and FedEx are pretty dialed in.
Okay,
so,
okay, that's good.
You're not really, but there are some delays now that there weren't previously. Typically when you ship ground, it's like it might be a day late or so. So I build that in to the shipping.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I guess get it out early. Yeah.
Logistics mind has been kind of beaten into me over the years of doing this. So, try to keep it pretty conservative I'm not trying to get people records overnight to the venue they're playing tomorrow.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's been over 10 years since you started the label. Is there a model? It kind of segues away from what we're talking about, but is there a model that works well for you when it comes to, working a record and releasing a record? Is there a template that now you follow that you've created from your 10 years of doing this?
Certainly. I mean, in general, there's best practices that we've implemented across and systems that we've put in place across, all of the facets of releasing an album, whether it's marketing or retail, etc., which has been developed over the years for sure. I kind of pause in saying it's like applicable, like cut and paste to every release, because there's some, like certain genres, for example, perform differently in different territories, for example. So you have to tailor your plans and strategies to the particular artist, you're working with for that particular release. So I feel like a somewhat dialed in, adaptable system is what we have in place now. And yes, to answer your question, it's been a work in progress this is the 13th, going into the 13th year. And,
wow.
It's like, I would say it hasn't like really fully formed until maybe just a couple of years ago. Now it's like, it feels pretty good. But then again, the industry is constantly evolving and shifting.
Right.
Certain partners ask for new things every other week, it feels like. So you're always adapting your systems.
That's so funny you're talking about that, because when you actually said fully formed and thinking about this is what was going through my mind when I was on your website today, and I was looking at all the releases and the website. I love it because it's simple, it's black and white, it makes room for the records, and it's very minimal, and but then you have merch and everything. A lot of young labels or people wanting to start a label look at a label like yours and want to know how to get where you are as fast as possible. I look at your label, and to me, it looks like something that's been honed and come together over the years. Is that true?
That's very true. I started in my bedroom putting out 7 inches with a big cartel, not even a website, and this is like 2009, so there's not even social media really.
Yeah, I used Big Cartel back then too.
Yeah, so Big Cartel, MySpace, the label had a MySpace. That was kind of the system. And
sure.
So, in that era, it was like way less involved in a way. So yeah, started very like minimal and has branched out. But yeah, like when it comes to just like working on the brand and the presentation and the e-commerce and all of that, it's certainly a work in progress. And especially like this label is bootstrapped, it never taken any like outside investment or anything. So it's like it's had to evolve over time. A lot of late nights, etc. A lot of like reiterations on the website. It's like it changes year in, year out. I feel like I got it in a good place now, but it's
So what would you say to younger labels who want to get to a fully formed state as quickly as possible?
That's a good question. I think there's multiple avenues to get there, right? It's, get some capital in the door, get out and talk to friends and family, and maybe try and scrape together a little, a little capital to sort of like make it a little easier and quicker.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like when it comes to like, for example, where the label's at now, we probably have like 20 subscriptions to things like Feature FM and like MailChimp and our e-commerce platform, and all of that like runs up
like hundreds of dollars a month just in those little things.
Exactly. And so So if you want to get there quickly, I think it's important to have all those little things. But if it's really truly just bootstrapping it, I think my number one advice is just pay attention to what other folks are doing and talk to people. Get out and meet people, whether it's through the internet or in real life, that are doing this. I know you have a community built with other record labels, and that's important. Just to like kind of bounce ideas off of people who are doing it, because when it comes down to it, people that run independent record labels, it's a pretty small community in the grand scheme of things.
Yes. Yeah, so, totally.
What you've built, the knowledge that you're like sort of providing is paramount, and honestly to like fostering the community in a way. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, that's like my number one advice.
Yeah, no, and it's funny you mentioned that, because for me, I had started my label just a few years after you, around 2010, 2011 was our first kind of big year. And by 2017, I had been feeling like I was spinning my tires and just not growing as much as I had hoped to be. And I hadn't reached that fully formed state. And I was really jealous of labels like you and people that I was following on Twitter. And the solution for me was exactly what you said, and it became this podcast, which was just calling up labels and saying, "Hey, can you help me?" And everyone said yes. Everyone said, and learning from them, and so that's exactly what I did, and that's great advice.
Yeah, I think it's crucial to to not just feel like you're going it alone. There's so much information out there. Yeah,
absolutely. I want to sidetrack for a second, because you talked about getting capital and getting investment, and and that's it's such a lot of artists think that we could just do this and that the cream will rise to the top and we don't need to put in money. But I mean, any business, even a coffee shop, you have to buy a cappuccino maker. Like any business, it has a certain amount of investment. If you were to start a label today and put X amount in, whatever that number is, I don't care. What would you spend it on? What would you invest it on? I mean, you mentioned some of these third-party apps that are kind of inevitable, but what would you kind of put $1,000 into or $10,000 into?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to prioritize the music and the artist. So, because you want to make sure that while the other things are important, that the music is the first thing people are going to want to connect with. So it's like, I would say, putting the first little bit into, physical media, as like antiquated as that sounds.
Yeah,
it's sure. Press some records. That's like gonna. It's hard to sort of like it's hard to model like what the DSP stuff is going to do in the short term. Like over time, for sure, like with a catalog, digital revenue is key to growth and for any record label. But in the short term, like find an artist that you believe in, and tailor your physical release strategy to that particular artist, whether it's a local friend who is in the same scene as you, and 150 people come out to their shows consistently locally.
Sure.
That would be a good like first artist to sort of like invest your time and energy into, because even if 50% of those folks, they bought a ticket, the chances of them wanting to buy a physical piece of music are high.
Sure.
And so maybe start there. And then from there, I think it's important to invest it in your brand, like a logo, like get a proper graphic designer to help you with sort of the look and feel of your label, because anymore, like how you present online, I think goes a long ways. Especially when you're first starting something out,
Yeah, for sure.
So,
As you said something that I found really interesting, because I was having a call today with another label, and we were talking about, and they were a brand new label and getting started, and their first release is going to be digital only, and then they had planned to do a physical down the road, and I wasn't able to articulate actually what you just articulated, but I basically said that when you have a physical record, when you have a vinyl or a tape, and if it looks great, that really carries a lot of the marketing responsibilities right off the bat. It's just people pay a little bit more attention, whether this is right or wrong, but people pay a little bit more attention to something physical in the real world. And, a lot of smaller labels who are getting started, who don't necessarily have the capital to invest or even the time to wait a year to get a record, they think, well, how much money can I make off of streaming? And I love what you said about how in the long term, streaming can be profitable from a back catalog perspective. But in the short term, it's extremely difficult unless you get one of those elusive playlists. But that is a very interesting way of looking at it as to why physical is maybe important, especially in the short term. I'm sorry, exactly. I'm just having an awakening here. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. And that the instincts as someone that doesn't have a lot of money to put into starting a record label would be like, let's keep the cost as low as possible. Uh-huh. But, you know, as much as we all hate "quote unquote" capitalism and the old "you got to spend money to make,"
right? No, I think I lost you. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I know. Yeah. You were saying you got to spend money to make money. It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's ugly, but it's true.
It's ugly, but it's true. Yeah. Exactly. And that's not to say that you can't have success with a digital only label. I just think that it's harder to predict. Like, you know, the statistic of the past year that I've been throwing around is 60,000 songs get uploaded to Spotify every day. Yes. And that in the, you know, when it comes to starting a label and releasing digital only, that's what you're up against.
Good point.
You're up against 60,000 other tracks getting uploaded every day. And, you know, when it comes to DSPs, although the editorial playlists are splashy and, you know, feel good and can be helpful, the algorithmic stuff is what's actually driving a majority of the streaming traffic and revenue. So, and in order to trigger sort of the way that the algorithms are built, it's all sort of like reward based in a way. So get to 10,000 streams, trigger better algorithm. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
yes,
all of this is available. Information is available online. But so I don't want to get into the weeds.
No, I love it. That's what this show is for. The show is about the weeds.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, just with that in mind, it's like, it's, you know, I think, and then another thing, you know, at the end of the day, like going into creating a record label strictly to make a profit off the bat shouldn't be the reason why anybody gets into it if they're getting into it from like a music loving perspective. There's plenty of people that invest capital in songs, and there's the Mercuriadises of the world now going and all of that. But like, you know, when it comes to an independent record label, yeah, sometimes the cream can rise to the top, basically to bring it full circle. Sometimes it can.
Sometimes it can. It's a running record label isn't like the best source of passive income.
That's true. That's true.
So I wanted to, you know, as we're talking about digital only and physical, I'm skipping ahead in my questions because it seems to me like merch and physical records do play a big part in what you do. Is that true? Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's certainly true. Sort of like just to sort of give you broad strokes of the labels kind of like revenue streams,
Sure.
which that's another important thing to touch on. Is the more revenue streams you have as a label, the more secure financially you're able to be. The more predictable the future is.
Right.
So yeah, merch and physical music is a big part of what we do, and that mainly just comes from how the label started. Like, we started in an era like when streaming wasn't a thing, and so the first releases were physical only. I didn't even put them on iTunes, which in retrospect was a big mistake.
Right.
But I wasn't even thinking about that in the beginning. It was it was
still
press records.
It was still pretty arduous to put a record on iTunes back in 2009. It wasn't. I mean, it was getting easier, but
totally. Since 2011, we've had distribution, so it kind of took care of that. But yeah, it was arduous. I didn't even know it was arduous, to be honest with you. I wasn't even thinking about it. It was about the physical. I grew up mail ordering from Drag City, and that was the world I knew, going to the record store to get the new music. Like, I'd read about a record in Spin Magazine and then go buy it at the record store. And that was my whole kind of system, and so that's all I knew.
It's funny. When you mentioned Big Cartel, I haven't thought about them in a long time, and I'm sure they're still around. They were certainly pioneers at the beginning, and I remember being one of the times when I shifted from Big Cartel to Bandcamp was because Big Cartel at the time did not have a way to sell MP3s, and again, this was before streaming, so you were either selling a CD or a vinyl or an MP3, and they didn't have a platform for that. And they introduced something, I don't know if you remember this, but they introduced a digital app, and it was like a third-party system as a way to sell MP3s. Because it's so funny, but like back in the mid-2000s, there just wasn't a platform for selling digital files like there absolutely is today. And so I remember they introduced this thing, but then it came with like a monthly fee, and that was kind of frustrating because Big Cartel were taking a cut to begin with, and I just thought it would be another feature on their site. And then around that time, around 2009, 2010 is when Bandcamp kind of formed. And anyway, sorry, I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, no, same story. We merged off of Big Cartel like as soon as Bandcamp came into the fold, and that was the main web store after that. I don't remember that third-party digital thing.
Right.
I think we might have been merged over to Bandcamp by then. Yeah. 2010 is when we started uploading to Bandcamp.
Okay. Yeah, same. So it must have been just a little bit before that, or before I knew that Bandcamp was a thing, because I was looking for some sort of digital commerce solution back then. But to the makers of Big Cartel, congratulations, you were pioneers, I'm sure, in some way. Hopefully they're doing okay.
Yeah. I have no idea if they're even still around.
Let's go back. I think they might be. I feel like I'm still on a mailing list, but let's go back to 2009, because I'd like you to give us the genesis story. And you mentioned, this type of bedroom, putting records together. So talk to me about forming the label in the very beginning.
Yeah, definitely. So it's certainly not a unique origin story by any means. I was a musician playing in bands. In one band in particular, Woodsman was our band. And the label, I say the label before the label was, we had a tour that we booked via MySpace, playing, some DIY venues around the Midwest. I was based in Denver, Colorado at the time. That's where the label started.
Okay. Lovely town.
I moved to New York like a year and some change after the label started, brought the label with me. But anyway, so this is 2009. the early part of 2009, and we had this tour. We had recorded, like, we were living in a band house at the time, and we had a recording studio in the living room, and, you know, we threw shows there, etc. So we had the capability to record our own record. We made it, and we made CDRs for the tour. And I was always interested in labels, etc., but I wasn't really sure how to go about, like, even soliciting, you know?
Right.
So, like many other sort of labels, we just came up with a logo and put it on the back of the merch.
For legitimacy.
For legitimacy,
yeah.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's totally right.
Not only is that not a unique story, that is the story. That's like
the story.
Yeah, that's what you have to do.
That's what you have to do. It was legitimacy for sure. And then it was also, like, shortly after that, some friends and bands touring at the time were like, hey, can we use that logo on the back of our CD?
Really?
Yeah, the second time that happened, I was like, actually, I should just... how about I make your CDs for you? I'm going to take ownership over this logo. And
so people wanted to be a part of this collective.
Because it was already a community, because we were throwing house shows and, like, you know, like, and the other thing is I was pretty, like, in the blogs. So our band, like, I had gotten sent our music around to, like, Stereo Gum, Fader, Pitchfork, and, like, Woodsman got on Pitchfork, you know, that year or something. And, like, it was, my friends were seeing that and they were like, hey, can you do, I didn't realize at the time, but they were basically asking me to do PR for their bands and put out their records. Yeah. So it's like, okay, I can do this. The funny story about that is, like, back then the websites used to list a phone number of their offices. So to get a Fader writer's email, I called the number to the switchboard and just asked for an email address, and they gave it to me. And it worked.
It seems like a simpler time as we joke about that, but it was such a struggle. Like that, it wasn't a great time. I always felt like everything I was doing was so inferior to the real labels who were making 1,000 Glassmaster CDs.
Totally, exactly. It's like sort of became this thing where we would go on these tours and then meet these people that are also in the community playing shows, and that would turn into, like, a 7-inch release or whatever.
Right.
So that was all happening. My band went on to sign with Mexican Summer within, like, a year of Fire Talk starting, and then I put out this band Tennis, who's still around, great friends of mine, their first 7-inch, and they went on to blow up. I helped, you know, get them on the blogs and stuff, and they went on to sign to Fat Possum, like, within a year of that 7-inch. So things were, like, taking off in a bigger way for some of us. And then the label just became, as I was touring, the label just became like a creative kind of outlet to put out cool music, you know, press 12 inches with the whatever extra money I had from working my jobs and going on tour and stuff. And so
you were signed with Mexican Summer for a while you were running the label? What was that like?
We did one record with them and then 2 records with a now defunct label. And so it was a good learning experience.
Yeah,
honestly,
I imagine.
It taught me, it basically made me, like, realize that I need to do this. I want to do this myself, you know?
Okay.
I felt like, I was learning a lot about, especially, like, the retail side of running a record label, because that's not something you're really tuned into when you first start, and like how many barriers there are to, like, getting your records into the store, not only into the store, but featured in a place where people might actually see it and buy it. So there was that aspect, but yeah, it was totally a learning experience to be on a label while releasing records. Felt like I was very much just kind of in record label indie rock, like, college at the time. You know?
That is a good way to do it. If things got started in 2009 and you're in a band, people are borrowing your logo to to do this. At what point did you, and of course, as you mentioned, you're doing these responsibilities that we now know are manufacturing, PR, all these, marketing, these different things that you were just doing whatever you thought was right. At what point did you say, okay, I have to take this seriously. This is going to be a legitimate thing. At what year did you realize, let's do this
Yeah, I
for
feel
real?
like I was always taking it like somewhat seriously, so I don't want to like discredit
Sure.
those early releases because
Right.
very early on, like 2010, I pressed the first like full-length record and like did a campaign around it.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
had distribution, by then through the
Wow.
contacts I was making play on another record label, but it wasn't until like the band really stopped playing, honestly, like 2016, 17, that I was able, it wasn't about getting serious because I always in my mind I was serious about it, but it was more about being able to allocate enough time to run
Okay.
a legitimate business, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that took living in New York City where it's extra expensive just to live your life. It took many years to kind of get to that point where it was even possible for me to put in enough time to do it for real. That was 2017. The band stopped, so that I decided I wasn't going to like tour in a band anymore, basically. And that freed up a lot of time, as you can imagine.
Sure.
And then in the same year, like a bunch of life changes. I had a kid, and
Wow.
I sort of like, the background of all of this, I went to film school, so I was working on movies and TV shows in the city. That was my day job.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I sort of had a realization in 2017 that like I need to pick one. I'm doing these creative things, trying to make a living, but I need to pick one thing and focus all my energy into that. And so I decided in 2017 that was going to be the thing. Signed a distribution deal with Red Eye Distribution, and just started making like some strides towards making it a real business. I formed the LLC finally, all that stuff. It was like years of just doing it rogue, not proper. And then I would say it took another like 2.5 years to kind of get it to a level where it was making enough revenue to sustain myself and an employee and et cetera. So
that's a very, very big move to quit a job, especially when you have a kid, and to kind of, go full in on something. And for you to have picked one, I feel like, in any business, I feel like that's kind of necessary. I think we all could do a lot of different things, but I don't think we can do them all at the same time. So picking one, that was probably a pretty big decision for you.
Yeah, it was really scary. It was really scary, I am privileged, though, that I have a partner who has always worked in corporate America and could kind of like, hold down the family in that respect. Yeah. So that's a huge privilege that allowed me to kind of like focus a bunch of energy on this. It wasn't easy,
Yeah, but for sure.
I sort of like, also that time, which may be useful to your listeners, not only was it allocating time but to doing the actual work, but it was allocating time to learn as much as possible. So, like your podcast, for example, I listen to it I listen to it all the time, like every new episode. I'm an avid listener.
That's great.
But it's not just your podcast. It's like Music Business Worldwide. It's getting involved in A2IM and going to all of the industry functions and just absorbing as much information about the music business as possible, and just keeping the education, music business education being 20 or 30% of my work week is important. I think to just understanding, like
that's really good. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, obviously, it's kind of what I do, but I was just reading a book on NFTs, and I finished a chapter, And I just shook my head. I was like, I did not understand any of that, what I just read. But
Totally.
I kind of reminded myself, I was like, this is your job. Like, you have to, like, you don't have to fully understand it. You don't have to be a guru, but like, you have to have a understanding of a lot of things in this industry. I was just kind of coaching myself today.
Totally. Yeah, that's the truth. And like knowing that what NFT means today is surely to evolve and be something different in 5 years, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
I heard somebody talking about instead of non-fungible tokens, like fungible tokens being the future of the music business, because fungible takes the scarcity out of the digital token, you know? It can be, so
interesting.
These things are going to evolve. So
I know.
It's important to stay on the pulse.
I think that's really interesting that you said 20 or 30% of your week was or is dedicated to learning, and I think that's such a great thing. And even if it's just business books or marketing books or business podcasts, it's part of taking it seriously.
Exactly. Yeah. I listen to entrepreneurial podcasts, like, finance. I'm interested in finance, like all of these different things that apply back to running. Because at the core, this is running a small independent business. It just so happens that my passion is music. So that's what the business sells or whatever, however you want to say it. The mechanics of running the business are the same as literally any other business. So.
You mentioned something, and I want to kind of go down this path. You talked a little bit about multiple revenue streams, and I'm absolutely a huge believer in that, and that's something that is preached in any niche, not just in music, but in any sector of the business world. Multiple revenue streams is so great. Can you let our listeners know a little bit of what type of revenue streams they should be looking for as a record label?
Certainly. So number one is D2C, direct to consumer, or in the music business, we tend to call it D2F, direct to fan.
Mm-hmm.
And that is your web store, your Bandcamp, digital and physical goods. That can be, anywhere you get a record or a download or a piece of merch to an end, one-to-one.
Yeah, right.
Your place to whoever's buying it.
Mm-hmm.
That is an important, big source of revenue because there's no middlemen, no middle people. You're getting max markup on that. So you should really try to make that as strong as possible. And then going down the chain, there's your distribution revenue stream. Ideally, it's physical and digital because the physical opens up avenues to get into independent retail, indie record stores, or Amazon, whatever. Some people are ideologically against Amazon, of course. Which is totally fair. And then there's the digital revenue that comes from your distributor, which is, streams, downloads, etc. The DSPs, Spotify, Apple Music. That is also a big driver, of course, because everybody listens to music digitally now. So that's, should be a high consideration. And then downstream from there, there's plenty of other other things you should certainly be looking at. Sound Exchange is a big, important one. Every label should be registered with Sound Exchange to collect what's owed on the master side of the recordings.
Right.
Is simply, the big one is satellite radio pays through Sound Exchange. Pandora. Yeah, exactly. And then there's sync licensing, which is for us a big portion of our annual business. So that is a lot harder to tap, but there are plenty of sync licensing agents or partners you can reach out to. And
do you work with a company
ours is sort of like multifaceted because we are a publisher as well.
Oh, okay.
And so but on the master side, we work with Terrorbird, which is a sync licensing. They do a number of things, publicity, sync. They have a publishing arm as well.
Okay.
And then they do radio promotion. So that is a big source of revenue. And then there's a bunch of other like kind of, I don't want to call them random because as a whole, they're all important. They might not be lots of revenue, but there are certain third parties that specialize in background music in retail environments. Like you go into H&M and you hear a song, like you can partner with a company that will, play your music and pay a royalty, basically.
Very cool.
And then another big one for us is like in person. Say we do a lot. Like we live in New York City, so we're fortunate to have a lot of access to like record fairs and stuff pre-pandemic, and now they're starting to come back. And then, we'll go. I had a table at Pitchfork Fest this year. I flew out and sold records there, and so we tend to like do trade show type things as another revenue stream. Sort of also like a marketing thing as well. Of course. But there is, we sell some records at those places. So that's another one. I want to say the list just goes on. I could probably name like 20 different things.
No, and that's amazing. What I love about this, and you talked about how it, in times of, if one of them shuts down, then you have something else to fall back on. But what I love about multiple revenue streams is it almost takes the stress off of, if you were to just look at streaming and say, I need to make, I don't know, $1,000 a month or $10,000 a month from streaming. That's an insurmountable task for any startup label, for any label that's been around for 10 years. It's a very tricky thing to do. But to say, I need to make $100 here, $100 here, $100 here, you know what I mean? That to me, all of a sudden takes the pressure off of this task of making a profit or earning an income, is by saying, okay, just relax. We just need to make 20% of our revenue goals from this source and 5% from this source. That's what I love about multiple revenue streams.
Yeah, it's great. And then it also like doesn't, when it comes to A&R and like signing artists, you don't have to get too in the weeds with like, well, this artist performs this way on this service, so we should be really considering that. You know what I mean? You can sort of tailor your revenue strategy to each release based on where maybe that particular artist can excel. And so it just sort of like, it doesn't,
And so those revenue streams, the pie, if you will, the pie chart would look different for each one of your artists. You might have an artist that does really well on Spotify, and then another artist who does extremely well in H&M stereos, but not on Spotify.
Yeah. I'd say usually it's either, DSPs, they perform well. It's maybe some perform really well selling physical records over others. Like there's, let's face it, like certain types of music stream better than others. And there's more placements and places to place, like, shoegaze over like noise music or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's that. And then, maybe one artist, is very syncable, and we get 5 syncs in a year for that one artist, but 0 for this other artist. And, things like that.
What is I just want to touch on streaming a little bit, especially, when you have artists that might be left of center music. And I know that you have a big emphasis on physical, but does your label have a strategy when it comes to streaming?
Yeah, 100%. We have just the broad strokes. Again, it's another sort of like system that we've built when it comes to streaming. I think that when it comes to streaming, like across the board, your best bet is organic streaming, because if if your artist can stream from organically from real fans, that's going to even improve the algorithmic stuff. That's going to potentially be a pitch point where you can go back to the DSPs and say, look, people are listening to this. Shouldn't this be in this playlist? And sometimes that works, So, but like in general, I am a big proponent in following the best practices of the DSPs, and all of this information is available. You can go to Spotify for Artists and see what they want you to do. Yes, I know it's a pain to like learn all these things and they're changing constantly, but I think in order to find success on streaming platforms, like in a broad sense, following the best practices is helpful,
I totally
it's
agree.
not crucial, So whether that on Spotify is like making sure your track has a canvas and you're you're pitching via their pitch tool X amount of time in advance. So there's that side of it. And then there's also third-party playlist pitching. That's part of our marketing strategy. So we do that for every track we release.
And have you just built up your own contact list of curators?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Just like blogs.
There are contact lists available, but they tend to be sort of, I don't know. I've always been a big proponent of like doing the work ourselves.
That's right.
So we've kind of spent the time over the years developing our own list. So yeah, it's that. And then also, we hire out for PR on all of our releases, and there's usually multiple folks working the releases. That plays into streaming as well, because a lot of the third-party playlists that perform well are tied to like NPR Music or Pitchfork or Stereo Gum or tastemakers like that. So
yes,
just being in that ecosystem is helpful. Other labels, like we have friends that work at much larger labels than ours that we can like send a track to, and they'll throw it in their playlist, things like that, are helpful.
It is remarkable how one thing can lead to another. And I had a track on a kind of a reputable third-party playlist that's very small, super hyper curated. And when it got on this list, and I reached out to this person, personally, and when it got on this playlist, it immediately got picked up by a much bigger playlist that's I think even owned by a major. And then it got picked up by Spotify and a few others. And I was like, wow, those people are watching his playlist
definitely.
And letting him do the hard work of curating and then and stealing from them. That was really interesting.
Totally, yeah, because you imagine if you're working at a DSP and 60,000 tracks are getting ingested every day, that's a lot to weed through.
Right.
And like, how do you...
That's right.
So that's part of it. And then another big thing that we do is I have a Chartmetric account, and I monitor analytics constantly and sort of use those analytics based on how a track is performing to push marketing in other channels if something like catches, So if you're catching a wave on Spotify because of what you just described, getting the playlist snowball effect, that would be a good opportunity to create some marketing on socials and reinforce that and kind of, create even more sort of like organic listens on top of everything that happened, and I think you can drive sort of streams that way as well.
It's like the inverse of releasing a single campaign. It's like you release the album and then you see what people are responding to, and then you put a campaign behind whatever song people are responding to.
Yeah, totally. That happens to us all the time, where like, a track that wasn't a single performs the best over like a 6-month post street date period. And then it's like, okay, maybe we should do like during pandemic times, it was like, let's record a live session of that track because people are responding to that track.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to camp out on the subject of best practices just for 1 second, just for our audience, because what you've said is so true. It is so obvious, but so few people do it. But I had my own epiphany on it, and I can't remember where I read about it, but somewhere on a blog or maybe somebody on the show. But for any of these third-party companies, whether it's Bandcamp, whether it's Spotify, anywhere, or even Twitter or Instagram, when you're creating a profile and they have fields that you fill out, where you're from, who you sound like, all these things, it's in our nature to kind of be evasive or elusive and to or mysterious, and to ignore some of those things and not fill them out. And what you're talking about, how crucial it is to fill out some of those things, to upload a canvas, to do these things that we think it makes us look cool to not have a bio on Spotify. But what happened to me, I've talked about this on the show before, but I had an email from someone at Spotify, and it was about a week before my album came out, and they said, "Can you upload a photo to your bio, because you don't have a high-res photo in your artist bio, and we'd like to use it for the cover of a playlist." And this employee said, "In the future, make sure you've uploaded a current photo so that we can just grab it if we want to make it the cover of a playlist." And here I am, like, thinking, oh my goodness, I had no idea how important this was. And the same thing when we had Bandcamp, when we had Andrew from Bandcamp on the show, he was saying the same thing about how important it is to fill out those things, upload a photo of your vinyl. And it's just so important. I'm just going on a rant here, I'm sorry, but it's so important to do these little things that we think don't matter, but they're there for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. They very much matter, and it's hard to sort of like know that Spotify uses those bio photos. They pull directly from there.
Mm-hmm.
How would you know that?
How would you know?
Yeah, but it's there for a reason, so you should probably do it. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's all across the board. Like, all DSPs have different best practices, and right now at Apple, it's Apple Music Motion is a big thing they're pushing.
Okay.
And like certain things, when it becomes kind of an initiative at the service, it's good to know about that and do it, because it's gonna, it reflects the fact that you're listening to, you want to be a good partner.
That's right.
You're listening to what they're asking, and you're interested in being a good partner.
Well, you mentioned Spotify. I'm blanking on the feature, Canvas, and you mentioned that, and I'm stressed out right now as we're talking, because I'm like, I haven't done any of those. I don't even know how to do them. But now I'm thinking that goes totally against my own ethos of making sure I follow the best practices of these platforms. I'm like, why haven't I just done something? And it's so crazy, because that system, I mean, I knew somebody who was beta testing it in 2019. The Canvas was a huge initiative by the company, and for some reason, and they know what they're doing, they think that this is an important feature, and for me to not do it is almost like disobeying the boss. You know what I mean? As crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of caution going down that route of thinking too much, because I think there's important in creative kind of I don't know, decoupling from the kind of like what the music industrial complex or whatever in a certain way. But so I don't want to say, like, if you don't do these things, things aren't going to happen for you.
Right.
That's not always
always true. Yeah.
But it will increase your chances if you're game. And I think that something like Canvas is, you make a good point about the fact that they spent X amount of money developing that with their, over a course of years. So it must be important to them.
Sure.
And therefore, whatever the reason is, it might be might be beneficial to participate. The one thing I will share about Canvas, which I think is public knowledge, but views on Canvas affect the algorithm. So that's just something that we do to
that's right,
make sure that stat is in our kind of like in there.
It is in Spotify for artists too. You can see there is
exactly.
now, there is a views section. Yeah, that's crazy.
Everything in Spotify for artists. There's now an analytics tab. All of that is basically them telling you what's important to their algorithm. Yes. So you should pay attention to that.
That's right. Yeah. Oh my goodness. This is I'm running out of time here because I have to cancel some of these questions, but this is all very important. I actually, when you're talking about Apple, I would love to be able to do a record in Dolby Atmos. I think if you could, I mean, only super rich people can do that right now, but if you could have an album mixed in surround with that follows their standards for Dolby Atmos, I think that would be a good way to have your album featured by Apple.
Totally, I agree with that. I also think on the flip side of that, I'm curious, like my take is some of the onus should fall on Apple Music. Apple, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, to develop
100%
a tool that can, I'm sure there's a way to develop software that can turn stereo recording into an Atmos recording, even if it's like not
official
perfect.
Yeah. Or what I think would be, I mean, or even the very least as a way to turn stems, to take 8 or 10, your drums and your keyboards and your vocals separated in that way.
That's the way, I think. Like, just submit your stems. Maybe it's 8 channels or something, and they turn it into an Atmos for
you. That's probably coming. Yeah, that's probably coming. But you're right. They're a $1 billion or $1 trillion company. I shouldn't be the one who has to license the software and to get the good version of Pro Tools.
Yeah, that's my one critique right now. It's like they're prioritizing Atmos stuff in their editorial ecosystem, and it's really cutting out those of us that can't afford it.
Yeah, totally. How do you? I got to move on because I have a couple of questions for our patrons, but I want to ask you in closing, how do you, thinking back to the beginning of starting as a band, and I've loved this conversation, by the way. You are very, very astute in this business, and this has been phenomenal. How do you balance the passive existence of an artist and the business acumen needed to be a label owner?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll go back to education again, because there was a point when I did not have that foundation of knowledge to be able to call myself a label owner. You know what I mean? It was some years of like transitioning from being a musician, learning along the way, seeing the inside, and then getting to a point where, where that was a reality. So yeah, I think that's just it. It's like always staying curious and on top of it. And, at my core, I've always been entrepreneurial, so that helps too.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, you must have had something back in 2009 that you were not just a musician in a band, but you also knew, hey, we should send this to Pitchfork, or I should phone the phone number of a magazine on the website.
Yeah, exactly. It just comes down to being able, in that time, to reach as many people as possible with the music, was always the number one goal. And I think that's still very important to this day. Working with artists, we want to reach as many ears as possible with all of these releases. So
where did that come from, that entrepreneurial spirit? Was that in your DNA as a kid?
Yeah, definitely. My dad's self-employed, so I had that background. My mom was a reporter at a newspaper, so she was always out roaming around, like getting the scoop or whatever. So, and then I was in like business entrepreneurial shit, as lame as this sounds, club in high school.
That does sound lame.
Yeah, very.
That's very cool,
nerdy. And then I was playing in punk bands, and like that was kind of I was a skater, you know, and like that whole world is very just like anti-establishment. So I was always just like, F the man, I don't want a job. Yeah. Why do I want a boss? That sounds like it sucks. I want to be my own boss. You know?
Yeah. So, that's
all
great.
This combination of things.
That's awesome. Well, listen, I have enjoyed this conversation immensely. Thank you so much. If you have a second, I have a couple more things for our patrons. Is that cool?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. If you want to hear my extended interview with Trevor, go to otherrecordlabels.com/Patreon to become a patron, where you can get all of the bonuses for our listeners. Also, go to firetalkrecs.com. That's FIRETALKRECS.com. And be sure to visit our website, otherrecordlabels.com, where we have helpful resources and tools for independent record labels and independent musicians. Thanks for listening.